welcome to another episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say. And today we have Britton with us. You did a video with us on YouTube recently, and that was nice. So it's good to have you on the podcast. We're gonna get into some frequently asked questions, and you'll be heading on to the airline soon, right? So maybe there's some questions there about how you kind of like your journey went. Would you like to introduce yourself for a moment?
Cool. Yeah, my name is Britton Heaps. I'm a flight instructor here at Thrust Flight. I've been here since April of last year, and I have learned a lot while being a flight instructor.
Awesome.
So I feel like I've learned more as a flight instructor than I did as a student.
Were you a ZTA student?
No, I was not. I was a college student. I just moved out here after graduating my college program to be a flight instructor here at Thrust Flight. So
Awesome. That college program, a lot of people, I think I talked to a few people about that. How was that? What was it like? I don't understand the college programs very well.
it was a lot more comparatively to ZTA, a lot more laid back. Being compared to ZTA, where you do private in a month and a half, 2 months, or commercial in a month. Commercial takes 2 semesters. So you start commercial in the fall, you end commercial in the spring, right? So April, and so it's a lot longer compared to a month and a half here at Thrust.
And you still have more curriculum to cover. Like you have other studies. and things going on,
So
right?
it's associated with a bachelor's degree,
Mhm.
and so it's not just flying, right? It's your flying is kind of like a lab per
Mhm.
se, and you still have to do like your bachelor's degree, like your art and math, science, all the other boring stuff before you go fly an airplane.
What was your reasoning for choosing to go to a university like that?
So the reason I chose a university is the reduced hour requirement. If you
Mhm.
go to an accredited university by the FAA,
Mhm.
you can
Oh,
get
is that
so
a
many.
restricted ATP option?
Yeah,
Okay.
so people get it mixed up. Restricted ATP versus reduced hours.
Okay.
So restricted ATP and reduced hours are the same,
Mhm.
but you can have 1,500 hours and still get a restricted ATP based on the certain hour time requirements,
Right. Okay.
right? So like for being 21 years old, you can get a restricted ATP but have 1,500 hours
Mhm.
compared to being 23 years old.
Mhm.
You have to, it's just different.
There's a lot of
Things.
variables
Yeah, there are a
there.
lot of variables with what means restricted ATP, right? I
Right.
just have the reduced hours as long as I'm going to get my restricted ATP with that
Mhm.
because I have so many hours of accredited coursework through
Mhm.
university.
Okay, that makes sense. Gotcha. And now that you came here to start your journey as a CFI before moving on to what's next for you. Uh, was it different? What was it like noticing the differences though in how we're training here? Not necessarily like how we're training, but it's a different experience, right?
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
How from your perception as a CFI, like you said, it's not as laid back. What does that really mean? What does that look like?
So thrust is a lot more focused, and it's a great thing in my
Mhm.
opinion. I love
Mhm.
being a part of the ZTA program here.
Mhm.
It's all about student success and getting students where they want to go quicker,
Mhm.
right? Where the college program, while I enjoyed it, right? I'm not
Mhm.
speaking negatively of it at
Absolutely
all.
not. Yeah.
I had great instructors, but at a time, my instructor had 8 students at a time,
Mm.
where as an instructor here, I have no more than 4. So we're able to be a lot more focused on the student and
Mhm.
fly them more frequently compared to as a college student, I only flew twice a week,
Mhm.
right? And that was on a good week, right?
Yeah.
Maintenance, weather, right? That has a stuff, has a lot of stuff to play into it as well. And if I was lucky, what we had like as like a flex block, we could fly 3 times a week,
Okay.
right? But a lot more restricted on how much you can fly because it's a lot slower paced.
Mhm. Yeah, I gotcha. Well, it sounds like a good option to do both if you did want to still get a degree
Yeah.
and get your certificates. So I hadn't heard a lot about what it's like to go through that sort of program, but it's cool to know that you're here and you got to see the best of both worlds. Um, y- as a CFI, you said you've probably learned more than even as a student. I think people even who go through ZTA tend to say there's a lot of learning to do as an instructor. Do you have any examples of that?
I
Hmm.
mean, there's so many different things as a flight instructor you pick up on differently.
Hmm.
Um, uh, as a student, you're taught a certain way, right?
Hmm.
Just because you're a student, right? You don't know anything different.
Right.
As an instructor,
Hmm.
you see so many different ways of doing things. It really opens your mind up to actually, this is something I never thought of before.
Mm.
Or you have to develop instructional knowledge
Right.
rather than just enough knowledge to pass a commercial check ride, right? Like you have to be
Mm.
able to describe eights on pylons in a way different than a commercial student have to describe eights on
Right, because
pylons.
being able to perform it versus being able to like describe it with words, it probably takes maybe a different level of understanding.
Correct,
Um,
right?
is there an example that you could think of when maybe like there was an aha moment as an instructor for you? Maybe it's like how to describe something to a student, even if you knew it, something like that.
Every student learns differently. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, it's hard to give an exact, course, verbatim statement on that
Mm-hmm.
because every student has a different brain,
Right.
right? You could fly with one student of flight before,
Mm-hmm.
and they may pick up on things really quickly
Mm-hmm.
because their brain receives information differently.
Mm-hmm.
You could have a student afterwards who is on a much different like level of learning
Mm-hmm.
where they require different examples,
Mm-hmm.
right? Where they may require, for example, let's say we're doing steep turns. Steep turns here at Thrust Flight, we love using trim because it alleviates that extra pressure needed, and really just the plane's flying itself in a sense. We're just adding that, that bank and keeping coordinated with the rudders.
Yeah.
But some students really prefer the trim wheel on the bottom between the two pilots. Some students can't make that make sense to them, so they use the yoke electric trim.
Mm. Is that what's
And
on top of it?
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
like on the left side of the yoke, there'll be little trim tabs there. You
I
can
think I've seen it because I was
yeah,
flying with Keelan recently. He actually basically gave me a discovery flight, but I was like, "Oh, okay, I get the trim. I get
yeah,
the idea of the trim now."
yeah. So that trim, some students prefer using that yoke trim rather than using the wheel trim. And so even though it's something as simple as that, it just shows how people, even though it's the same concept,
Okay.
receive information differently,
Yes.
right? Because I mean, we're not you and I are different. Our brains receive stuff differently. I mean,
Mhm.
no student's gonna be the same.
Gotcha, and that I guess that's kind of an aha moment in of itself, just realizing how different people like to,
Yeah.
operate, even if it does have the same result, and how it actually does matter. You think that if it works one way, then everyone should be able to do it the same way, but I
And
guess
that's
that's
as a CFI, it's been the most difficult. Like, why does this not make sense to you if it makes sense to me?
yeah.
Right? Because I remember when I was a student, I was trying to do eights on pylons and I hated eights on pylons. And my
Mhm.
instructor was like, why aren't you getting this?
Yeah.
He's like, it's so frustrating to watch you do this maneuver and
Mm.
you can't get it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, dang, okay. Like,
I ju
and I wasn't like offended because he was like, we were like, just having a joking conversation. But
Mhm.
then I was doing the same thing. I was watching a student and I was thinking to myself, like, why are they not getting it?
Yeah.
And the more you break it down, you realize that you are not them, right? And they are
Mhm.
not you. And
Mhm.
so what may have been taught to you will not work for them.
Mhm.
And so luckily at Thrust, we have a very nicely laid out maneuvers guide.
Mhm.
And so it simply lays out the basics of each maneuver
Mhm.
and using different techniques as well that are instructor specific, right? Will help the student really achieve that success that they need here to succeed.
That maneuvers guide, is that something we created? Because I'm not familiar with it, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's a resource that Thrust Flight's made available to their
Mhm.
students.
Mhm.
It's going to have the ACS standards for each maneuver, the
Mhm.
standards that you're held to for a check ride, as well as information from the pilot handbook of aeronautical knowledge, airplane flying handbook, stuff compiled together that's been put together by our chiefs here at Thrust that allows students to kind of sit home, read that maneuvers guide, and chair fly maneuvers. And
Mm.
so, for example, like slow flight, right? You're gonna bring the power back to a certain setting, right? Then you're gonna put the flaps in and maintain your altitude with your
Mm.
power, right? Pitch for your airspeed. Kind of walk the student through those steps individually, so that when they
Mhm.
get in the airplane, it's not going to be a fire hose. Rather, well, it'll be less of a fire hose,
Yeah.
but it helps them become more prepared.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. That sounds. I can imagine myself learning that way. The chair flying thing. I hear people talk about that. I'm a hands-on person, and that's the closest to hands-on I think studying gets, to be able to have like maybe almost like a flow to it.
Yeah, hundred
Each of those
percent.
maneuvers. So that's nice to hear. Did you utilize any chair flying stuff when you were learning?
I never did.
Oh.
And I regretted it because I recently did my multi-engine training, my multi-engine add-on,
Mhm.
and I chair flew a lot, and that helped me get a really good foundation down
Mm.
that I did not have going into my original flight training, and it took me a lot longer to get concepts down.
Mm.
And so now I'm getting ready to do my type rating in the jet that I'm hopefully going to be moving into,
Mhm.
and the flows and then the chair flying and using flashcards, stuff that I picked up from students actually here at Thrust Flight,
Yeah.
have taught me how effective that really is,
Mm.
right? Because we preach it, but now I'm actually doing it,
Yeah.
right? And I see the benefits of it.
Mhm.
And so that's what I did all day yesterday was I literally just wrote down flows and read them off and like just chair flew these different maneuvers or flows.
Yeah. That's a good example too of something learned as a instructor. I think that's really cool to hear more about. And so you're going to be getting your type rating soon. Um, Did you had to go through? We're gonna pivot a little bit. Did you have to go through a bit of a interview process? Kind of what happened as soon as you became a CFI, and how did you kind of transition into getting to the next step of your career?
So when I was a college student, I went to a career fair,
Hmm.
and luckily for me, we were privileged to have the airlines come to our school and
Hmm.
have like a career fair day.
Hmm.
And so I would always go, even though I was a private pilot student, or through different phases of training, and talk to the different recruiters.
Mm.
And I don't remember when, but it was a time I talked to a recruiter from an airline, a regional airline,
Hmm.
and asked about their cadet program.
Mm.
And at that point, I, interviewed, applied to their cadet program, and it was a technical interview. They talked to you about, what does this mean on an approach plate? What would you do in this situation? HR questions,
Hmm.
and that was 2 3 years ago.
Hmm.
But some cadet programs, your initial interview and subsequent follow up interview is all you really need until you get to like the
Right.
major airline you want to go to, right?
Wow.
So it all depends on what cadet program you use and how you utilize your cadet program.
And are you saying that with the cadet program, like you said, you kind of do a few of those steps of interviews and get involved with the cadet program? You're saying some of those steps are really at what the hiring process kind of looks like before, like, just to even get into one of the regionals. Like, there's not
Correct.
much more to do after that other than go through, get your hours, and get trained and things like that.
Paperwork, stuff like
Paperwork,
that. Yeah.
right? Okay, so you guys kind of about what time did you get actually legitimately involved with the cadet program?
So I've been involved for quite a while
Hmm.
now. So like I said, I joined about 2 3 years ago,
Okay.
and so being involved in the cadet program really is not a lot of hands-on stuff,
Uh
right?
huh. Okay.
Some cadet programs allow you to be like an ambassador,
Hmm.
where you go through and you're like an outreach for their school,
Right.
right?
Right.
So you could be an ambassador for your flight school for this
Right.
cadet program,
Hmm.
and that's as much really as hands-on as some cadet programs will let you kind of get.
And yeah.
Because other than that, you're just updating your hours every month on their website or talking to a recruiter every once in a while and saying, hey, here's where I'm at. What's kind of the current process look like?
Hmm.
So I know recently, right, we had some things slow down, but picking back up again. And so I
Yes.
would always email the recruiter, say, hey, how are things looking?
Oh, that's
Um,
like that's a good highlight though, to be able to have literally even just a point of contact in the airlines
100%. And
that
that's,
you can talk
yeah,
to.
really
Yeah.
beneficial because most people, especially here at Thrust, a lot of CFIs have their hours, but they don't have any point of contacts. And
Hmm.
so having a point of contact in this industry or someone you can network with is really beneficial.
And from talking to, and we do the podcast, right, and we do some YouTube videos. I've had the privilege of talking to quite a few airline pilots one on one at this point, and that's something I've gotten from them is people say networking and talking to people and getting to know people, of course, all those things, but just simply even having one point of contact that you can get in touch with. It seems like that's been the common denominator of them advancing to the next stages of their career.
100%.
I mean, I that's what it seems like to me. So that's a big deal. You said you talked to your recruiter, like you're able to ask them a little bit about the industry and the airline's needs in terms of hiring and things like that.
Yeah, just checking up on them, right?
Hmm.
Persistence is key. I mean,
Hmm.
really, if you want to succeed in anything, right, you
Hmm.
have to be persistent, resilient.
Right.
And so if you always ask, like, hey, like, what's going on, right?
Yeah.
What can I do to prepare, ahead of time?
Hmm.
And I mean, that really shows that you really do want to, you know, strive for greatness,
Hmm.
especially when, it's a very competitive industry right now.
Exactly. I guess before we move on from the recruiter, has he been able to give you any sort of insight to the hiring process or interviewing process or resume, things like that?
Yeah, the biggest thing that they all tell me is just be prepared. Recruiters are going to expect you to know a little bit about the airplane you're going to fly, right?
Hmm.
If you're interviewing for a position to go fly the Embraer 175, right? Know what kind of engine it has on it, right? Know the basics of it. Like if you're going to fly the CRJ, right? Know something about CRJ, right?
Hmm.
Especially jet engine systems. I mean, I talked to a recruiter, and one thing they said was a lot of people, I almost said students, applicants come to the interview process
Hmm.
and they ask them about like a jet engine, how does it work? And they don't have
Hmm.
any idea,
Yeah.
right? Because we're so used to flying these four-cylinder pistons,
Exactly.
we're not used to these
Turbines.
more complex turbine aircraft systems. And so being prepared on that level sets you apart from other candidates just because you show that you have put the effort in to come prepared, right? This is a
Hmm.
multi-million-dollar career you're getting yourself into, right? And so investing a little bit of time,
Mm.
a little bit of money even for an interview prep service to
Mm.
help yourself really stand out and set yourself apart from other applicants will help you in the long run.
Do you kind of have an aim for where you want to go? in the airlines? I don't know if you have like maybe a certain kind of plane you want to fly or somewhere you want to be flying out of, if, commuting, things like that.
No, totally. That's a
Mhm,
great question.
mhm,
I think a lot of people look for two things:
mhm,
airplane or airline,
mhm,
especially in terms of what's going to come with the best quality of life,
mhm.
right? For me, I really want to fly the 757. It's a Boeing airplane, or the 767. They call them the ugly sisters
Uh-huh.
because 757 is kind of weird and long, and then the 767 is kind of short or long and chubby.
Okay.
Really cool airplanes, really high performing airplanes, really fun airplanes to fly. From what
Mhm.
I've heard, I've obviously never flown one before,
Right.
and so
That's what
I
they say
really
though,
want to.
right?
I really that's what they tell me.
Yeah.
That's what the research or the industry experts tell me.
Mhm.
But yeah, the 757 has always been a dream for
I
me.
hear a lot of people talk about the plane they want to fly, and so I like to hear the different answers I get out of that. Going back to kind of getting into what you're studying and enjoying aviation for what it is. Are there like is there content? Is there channels? Is there articles? Do you like consume information in a certain way online from like certain sources?
That's a great question.
Hmm.
So I started out on a flight simulator actually a long time ago.
Yeah.
So that's where I got all my live, breathe, sleep aviation mentality from. And
Uh-huh.
so I was at AV Geek, right?
Yeah.
Still am.
Yeah.
I still play my flight simulator on the weekends just for fun, right?
Yeah.
And so doing that since I was the age of 10,
Uh-huh.
11, and just getting that understanding of, however skewed it may have been back then, right? Because I was
Hmm.
11 years old, to developing that along with my training and the knowledge you gain as a flight instructor, as you get
Hmm.
more flight hours, has really shaped my foundation
Hmm.
into really helping me understand, what is this airplane? What can it do? How
Hmm.
are the systems on this airplane? What is an APU, right?
Yeah.
You ask some other people what an APU is, they have no idea what an APU is,
Right. Because
right?
yeah. That is strange how the how that pure curiosity and interest can I feel like put you light years ahead sometimes from someone who's just only relying on what's given to them. Do you feel is there I guess at this point in your career, um, have you experienced any cool moments with any cool people that you'd like to maybe mention? I like cool stories, so
No, yeah, it's actually a great question. So when I flight simulator, we are part of a virtual airline because those
okay.
are things. There's a virtual ATC where
Uh-huh.
people will be ATC, and then there's pilots and there's airlines for the network.
Hmm.
And a long time ago, I think I was 12 or 13 years old.
Yeah.
Um, there was a little virtual airline group, and we did a group flight. And
Yeah.
so back then, before Discord, there was something called TeamSpeak,
Hmm.
and we all met up on TeamSpeak. We'd all talk and chat about the airplane and like more information on how hey, how do you load the flight plan in the MCDU, or
Yeah.
how do you do this approach?
Hmm.
And that little friend group of 6, 7, 8 people,
Hmm.
we're still talking. I mean, now,
Mm. That's
so having
awesome.
that insight and that resource where some of them are captains at major airlines, some of them are first officers at major airlines, right?
Yeah.
That resource and having that friend group really grow with you
Yeah.
has been really cool to watch, and it's been a really great resource to have.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I feel like people who get into those sorts of things are the ones who I've said this several times, but excel. But I think about other industries too. I mean, uh, the person like you say Steve Jobs or something like that. I mean, he enjoyed computers past the point of what school was talking about. And so he existed in what he loved outside of an educational system, and he thrived. And I think people who think like that tend to thrive. But I kind of want to go down this list of things, and maybe we could just answer them kind of like rapid fire, and then
cool. Yeah,
these are sort of frequently asked questions based on I guess Google.
I gotcha.
These people ask this to Google all the time. So is flying a small plane safe? I guess this is maybe for someone who's looking into these little planes and maybe curious about going into flight training. Maybe that's what they're asking. But is flying a small plane safe?
Flying a small plane is relatively, I mean, it's relatively safe, right? I
Yeah,
mean, it depends on how well they're maintained.
yeah.
Airplanes generally have to go, well, generally, they have to go under an annual inspection
Mhm,
every 12 calendar months,
mhm,
right? And for our planes here at Thrust Flight, right, they have to have an inspection every 100 hours as well.
mhm,
So there's so many different inspections that have to happen on that airplane
mhm,
that in a car you don't really do. And
mhm.
so, I mean, our airplanes fly 100 hours, it happens like every week and
Yeah,
a half, 2 weeks. And
right.
so every 2 weeks, it's getting a 100-hour inspection done where they inspect different parts of the airplane.
Mhm,
Same thing with that yearly inspection, an annual inspection, right? They
right.
tear things apart. They look make sure nothing's, getting worn, fatigued.
Mhm,
So all these different inspections and mechanical checkups, for
Mhm.
lack of better words, is very, very thorough. And so the airplanes are going to be flying in a smaller airplane, relatively safe. I mean, obviously things get more safe with redundancy, right? Like
Right.
another engine, right? You have
Mhm.
two engines. Some airplanes have parachute systems, right?
Mhm.
And so that all goes up from there.
Yeah.
But as a whole, I mean, it's safe.
Yeah, even mechanically though, I mean, that's one thing they teach you all about, right? Like if the engine fails, there's ways to get that safely on the ground, the plane. So I mean, it seems like there's a lot in place around safety. So I guess people who ask that, I can imagine. I mean, I've talked to people who have asked me about my job, and I'm like, these planes. I mean, the way we pay attention to how they're going, and our planes are very new too.
Hmm.
So I tell people, I'm like, I'm not scared at all when I go up in the plane, and I don't know anything about the plane, but I'm not scared about it because I see the way people take care of them.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess that's a good question. Do I need permission to fly into different airports?
Well, it depends what airport you're flying into,
Hmm.
right?
Hmm.
Different airports have different airspaces,
Hmm.
right? Let's say I'm flying from here to like Terrell, right? A small, one runway, really low key airport,
Hmm.
right? No, right?
Yeah.
But if I'm flying into DFW,
Hmm.
right, that goes through different airspace, right? You have different airspace clear entry requirements,
Hmm.
right? Where you learn more about that through flight training,
Hmm.
and through that, technically, you need clearance through that airspace.
Hmm.
And sometimes airports will have a very high traffic volume,
Hmm.
and they require what's called a PPR, or a
Hmm.
prior permission required.
Hmm.
And so you have to talk to them beforehand before going in. That way, they can kind of help sequence you in with their larger jet traffic.
Right, gotcha. And if you don't know, then it's either way. You should probably be doing a pretty detailed flight plan and check
Yeah,
ahead, anyways.
research is very important.
Hmm.
Very important.
How long does it take to get your private pilot license?
It all depends on the course you go through.
Hmm.
I mean, if you go through like a Part 61, pay as you go program, it could take you, you could fly on the weekends, just fly Saturday, Sunday, work throughout the week.
Hmm.
That'd take a little longer compared to someone who had an accelerated program like Thrust,
Hmm.
where you fly once a day, right? Or sometimes twice a day, depends on airplane availability, right?
Hmm.
So it's kind of apples to oranges based on of what program you want to really enroll yourself into.
Gotcha, that makes sense. Okay, gotcha. Can I fly at night with a private pilot license?
Flight at night as a private pilot is really similar as really any other pilot, right? You have to be what's called night current.
Mhm.
And for legal reasons, it's night current, but also like night proficient, right? How comfortable are you flying at night?
Yeah.
So to legally fly at night with passengers, I should specify, right?
Mhm.
You have to do 3 takeoffs and landings within 90 days at night, do a full stop.
Mhm.
But if you're just by yourself, you can fly at night all you want, right?
Yeah.
But ask, is it safe to do so after not having flown at night for like 6 months? Like if I want to go fly at midnight from here to Longview, Texas,
Uh-huh.
I haven't flown at night for a long time, right? That may not be the safest option, right? I want to do a couple laps in the pattern before I go out, kind of get those illusions, kind of, I don't want to say out of the way, but more familiar with them,
Right.
so I don't fall victim to them. But to
Mhm.
carry passengers at night, you have to do, the whole 3 takeoff landings within 90 days, do a full stop at night.
Gotcha. So regardless, it sounds like the question's more like, "Am I allowed to?" versus, "Can I really?" And that's probably what
Yeah,
you need to ask yourself. That makes sense to me. Well, I appreciate you for coming on here and let me ask you a bunch of questions
of
and
course.
and giving a little bit about your experience so far. I really hope. Hey, once you get to the airlines, we might ask you to come back. I have your number, so I'll bother you a little bit in the upcoming weeks. You only have a few more weeks left with us, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, gotcha. Well,
hypothetically. So we'll
yeah.
see what happens.
I think you said it before the podcast, but I'm gonna congratulate you anyways on nearing the next steps in your journey on in aviation.
Thank you.
So I appreciate you again for joining us. And if you guys enjoyed this episode, if you're still listening, I'm assuming you enjoyed this episode. If you're listening on streaming platforms, we'd love a rating. It really helps us out. Helps more people find out. Um, dang, I'm getting dry. It helps more people find out about our podcast. And of course, we just want to contribute to the aviation industry. And if you're watching on YouTube and you have questions, please leave a question and I'll do my best to bother you some more and ask about those. We'll see you guys on the next episode of Pilots Say What, where we hear what pilots have to say.